sags about 5 inches from one side to the other. It sags so much that if you put a dresser against the wall that's 2 feet thick, you've got to put 1.5 inches shim underneath the front legs in order for it to be sitting level.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Associate Editor Matt Milham.
Hello.
Rob Wadsack, Digital Brand Manager.
Hey there.
And Jeff Rose, Producer.
Hey.
You can email us your questions at fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. So, Matt, we heard from a listener who mentioned, I guess we were having a discussion of rigid insulating materials.
I guess. I don't even remember this at all.
I don't either.
Yeah.
So he could be making this up.
It's possible. I doubt it.
So we should read what he said.
Yeah. You want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Matt, you just mentioned using rigid fiberglass in the cut and cobble method. You've got to tell me where I can get this new stuff so I can dump that expensive and high GWP polyiso I've been using. I just love the idea of a rigid piece of my favorite old pink fluffy stuff. I bet it would be really fun to cut to. Keep up the good work, guys. Love the pod. Ryan. Yeah, I don't know. I might have said it.
We never caught it either.
Yeah, it would not be out of character for me to misspeak.
Any of us.
I mean,
and we wouldn't even find it remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, there is rigid fiberglass. So they're like drainage mat material for outside of foundations that acts as an insulation and a drainage plane, right?
That's what I've seen it used for.
Yeah.
And then you could always take a bunch of those old ceiling tiles that they use in like commercial buildings, the drop ceiling tiles, and just stack a bunch of those and cut and cobble them, right?
It's also ductwork. Like you can make ductwork out of these fiberglass boards too.
Yeah, because it does exist. And it comes
That's
both
the point, yeah.
faced and unfaced. Like, the face stuff, some of that like acts as a vapor barrier. And I guess you probably could use it in cut and cobble. I don't know that I would recommend that.
I wouldn't want to touch his stuff.
No.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole idea of cut and cobble is to create an air barrier as well, too, usually. Isn't you're foaming it in place. So,
Right.
I mean, you're not getting this is not...
It would take a lot more foam to get around
You're going to have to pack
the
in all
perimeter
those
of
fibers.
that. Yeah, you'd have to use the face stuff. But, yeah, I could possibly do it.
One of my earliest memories, and this is not an exaggeration, is my dad took me to what was the Busy Beaver Home Center in Western Pennsylvania one day to buy some stuff. And the Busy Beaver logo was what you might imagine. I think he was like holding a little hammer. But we were walking through the HVAC aisle, and I saw this wonderful board material of yellow stuff that looked so appealing. And I was like, oh, I bet that's really soft and cuddly. So I walk up there. My dad's not paying attention. I start rubbing my face on this board. And that was my introduction to fiberglass insulation.
Did you get a big rash?
I didn't tell my dad. I was like, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that. Right?
Why does your face look like that?
He didn't notice.
Yeah, the things you do when you're small and naive. I mean, that's almost as sad as that. Did you hear that story recently about the little boy who loved his little pet goldfish so much that he snuck into the tank at night and cuddled up with it in bed? And his parents found him lying in bed with his cute little goldfish cuddled up next to him.
Yeah.
No.
That's a conversation you don't want to have with a small child.
No.
Fortunately, they're easy to replace. It's hard
What,
to tell one
kids?
from the next. Yeah, that too.
That trauma will pass.
Yeah.
So someone else wrote in, Rob, love the podcast and the recent conversations on energy efficiency and savings. I believe Rob talked about buying and installing a well-reviewed low-flow shower head and was going to report back on how it performed with his family. For someone who's looking into the same thing, can you have Rob give us a report on how it works?
Yeah, so, I was trying to look at how to cut my electric bill since pretty much everything in my house is electric. And
So how do you make hot water with an electric tank?
I've still got an old electric resistance tank that's probably on its last legs. It's at least 10 or 15 years old. I mean, it seems to be working fine, but I'll take a look at that soon. But anyway, so I had said that I'd made a post on Green Building Advisor Forum. And
So you asked them what the best low-flow shower...
I was just kind of asking what whatever. No, actually, I was asking what would be the cheapest or easiest way for me to cut my hot water is like a third of my electric bill. So my wife and daughter take a lot of long showers apparently and do a lot of laundry. So I was trying to decide between a heat pump water heater and some other options, and somebody said, well, really, I mean, if showers are the main source of your hot water, cutting your volume of your showers would be a big deal. So I was looking, my existing shower head was like 1.75 gallons per minute.
Already low flow, right?
Which is already, 2.5 is like the threshold. 2.5 gallons per minute is the threshold for low flow shower heads, which doesn't seem that low, but they said something like back in the 90s, they could be more than double that. It's
5.5, right?
Can you imagine 5.5 gallons of water coming out of there every minute? That just sounds like a lot.
It sounds like heaven.
Yeah, well, it's great. Yeah, so, and that comes to the point where one of the toughest things about choosing a low flow shower head, if you have a family, is convincing the rest of your family that it's a good idea.
So did you even tell them you swapped it?
I did. There's no way I could have gotten around
I would have tried to not mention that.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And
they're tired. They're not going to notice.
I don't know if they're just humoring me and just toughing it out, or if they've just forgotten about it. But they did notice the difference for sure. It was plus it's a slightly narrower stream than the other. We didn't have one of those rain shower heads, but it was pretty wide, the old one, and this new one's probably 30% less diameter than that. And I definitely noticed the difference, and you can tell it's definitely a low flow because it takes a little bit longer for the hot water to reach you because it's obviously coming out slower.
Oh, right. So you have to start the shower earlier.
Yeah. So
to get the water up to temperature.
Yeah.
Of course you do.
It's noticeable how much longer it takes, but I haven't had any complaints from my family. And
so your daughter and wife both have long hair.
Yep.
Have they complained that it's hard to rinse soap and conditioner out of their hair?
No, and one thing you have to think about when you get a low flow shower head or faucet is the flow rate is also based on how much water pressure you have in your house. I mean, you've got volume and you've got pressure, and those two things together really.
What is the figure in GPM, gallons per minute, assuming what pressure?
I think it was around 50 PSI. I'm not 100% sure, but I should have looked that up before.
We'll put that in the podcast notes.
Yeah, I'll definitely look it up. But I bought one of this company Brightcore's shower heads. It's called the Ecomizer PC, and it's rated at 1.056 gallons per minute, and it costs about $40. And I figured that's a small enough investment to take a chance because some of their fancier shower heads were up around $80 or $90. And they actually asked you to put in your water pressure so that they could calibrate it so that you were actually getting the flow rate that the thing was rated for. So there's some sort of aeration device in these things that gives you the feeling of having more pressure.
More volume.
More volume than it's actually producing. And I
Is it comfortable? Is it a nice shower?
Yeah, I've been pretty happy with it. I mean, it's certainly, like I said, not as much pressure as the 1.75 felt like, and it's definitely a compromise, but it's still a comfortable shower. And I'm pretty darn sure I've been watching that Sense app that I have that it's been a noticeable reduction. I haven't actually looked at the numbers. I know when I put it in, so I can download the numbers. I mean, obviously there's too many variables because my electricity is also based on the outside air temperature because I heat with the heat pump, and so it would be pretty hard for me to isolate.
Yes, the
data.
Yeah.
But I do notice that the electric curves. I was trying to watch it over similar weather and time periods, and it's definitely noticeably less electric. And my solar panels have been inching up to matching the amount of power I use per day, where they were significantly the power consumption was higher before. So I don't have any actual data to prove that it's saving me electricity, but it certainly looks like it, and it's definitely using a lot less water.
But in the summer, you're just going to switch back to the other head. I mean, if you're getting it all from solar anyway, who cares? You know.
Well, as long as
go back up to the 5 gallon per minute one.
Well, as long as my
Just leave it running all the time.
Yeah.
as long as my family isn't complaining about it, I'm just going to leave it the way it is. Because the idea is that with my solar, I'm banking credits since I have net metering in the summer to cover my fall and winter deficit. And so my idea is that
He has to run a surplus.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to keep it the way it is as long.
So, bottom line, thumbs up, thumbs
So the bottom
down.
line is, unless you're starting from something that's like way above what a water sense rated head is, I think it's a reasonable thing to do. I think if you've got one of those super high power showers with multi heads or one of those rain heads, you're gonna probably have a problem convincing your family to switch to this thing. But I'd say 1 gallon per minute. It's key to get one that is a high quality one, because the flow rate is only part of the equation. It's the actual pressure and the aeration that creates the sensation of a decent shower.
There you go. So, thanks for that question, Kevin, and it gave us a chance to talk about Rob's
Exciting
shower.
stuff. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So I've had. Oh, here's one more thing. If you don't know it's worth getting a low flow shower head, this comes from the U.S. Department of Energy's website, energy.gov. You're supposed to place a bucket under the shower, and you're supposed to turn it off the shower when it gets to 1 gallon. So you're going to need to have a measured bucket, or you're going to have to figure that out ahead of time with it and put a Sharpie mark on there. And they tell you to time how long it takes to fill the bucket. If it takes less than 20 seconds to reach the 1 gallon mark, you would benefit from a low flow shower head. I'm going to do that test. And then I'm going to install one of Rob's 1 gallon shower heads and not tell the family.
Yeah. You need to get one of the fancier ones, because I didn't want to shell out the $90 on the chance that it might not be worth it, but the $40 just seemed like a decent amount to spend. But now that I know that this company makes some decent stuff, I'd be willing to try the better one.
The other company that's noted for this is a company called Niagara Conservation, and they make low-flow toilets and shower heads, and by all accounts, that's good stuff as well, and you might check out both of those. What was the company that made your shower head, Rob?
It's Brightcore, and it's kind of a weird company. Like they don't seem like a very big company. They're based out in California. I've actually talked to them. I think one of the owners on the phone, because it's that small of a company. And when I was just tracking the shipment, and they were very nice and very helpful. And I think I don't know if they got their start in this business, but they do a lot of stuff for hotels and the military, because they deal with people who have serious concerns about water consumption. Obviously, if you're on a naval ship, you have a limited supply of water. So
there's water all around the ship. What's he talking about?
Desalinate all that stuff.
That's true.
Yeah. And so they actually have this one extra feature on a bunch of their shower heads. And you can buy these little devices that do this separately to put in line behind your shower head, but it's a little button. So I mean, when you're just laddering up, you can hit it, and it either turns it off or turns it to a lower flow.
Yeah. I've had those on normal shower heads before, and it's actually a pretty handy thing.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be disciplined and care enough about that to
I don't like standing there in the cold.
No.
But
so maybe in the summer you use that button. Certainly not in the winter.
Yeah. So we got a letter from Keith. He writes, in episode 167, you were discussing the Garrison Colonial floor overhang. Do you remember this? We were talking about the energy penalty associated with the overhang on one of these things. And he mentions that one reason this feature was popular in some areas was for tax purposes. Second floor space was often taxed at a lower rate than the first floor square footage. There are techniques for handling the poor thermal and air infiltration performance common to this detail. When I resided my house, I attached 2-inch XPS foam to the underside of the overhang, taping the seams. Then I carefully wrapped the overhang with my WRB. I tucked it behind the WRB coming from the second floor and layered it in front of the first floor WRB. I then taped all the seams with the matching tape. This has resolved the cold floors that were a problem prior to this remodel. As you point out, the air infiltration causes the cold outside air to be channeled along the joist bays, extending the impact of the 16-inch overhang well into the core of the house. So I think that's what we said, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I think we determined that one of the sticking points of his method is that you might have to change the trim detail or the siding detail to extend
The
lower
panel down
to cover that extra layer of foam, which doesn't seem like an unreasonable thing to do.
Not if you're residing, for sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just love the idea that these guys are trying to save a couple bucks on their taxes, and they're at the expense of like their heating bills.
I don't think anyone thought about that until, probably, 20 years ago?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just
Was heat that cheap back then?
I don't know. Not to me.
Other than the taxes, there's also zoning setback restrictions that a lot of times.
So the foundation can be X number of feet from the property line, but the overhanging building doesn't count.
Yeah, we've featured a couple of houses recently, both on the website and in the magazine, that had to deal with that. There was on our design editor, Kylie Jacques' blog. She featured this one house that actually had slanted walls. It looked almost like a fun house. The walls slanted up as they went out as they went up, and
so the footprint was bigger at the top of the house than the smaller.
Yeah,
and
they were able to get a larger
walls.
second floor by actually making this sort of crazy.
Oh, I bet that was
house.
fun to build.
Yeah, and then also I'm pretty sure that Steve Basic, I think it was on Martha's Vineyard, one of the houses we featured, or at least that he's worked on. There's very tight size restrictions for accessory buildings on Martha's Vineyard, and he worked with the local inspector to determine how you would actually define the footprint of the house, and they figured out that they could build a larger house higher above grade as a compromise. I'm pretty sure that was the case.
We'll put a link to a story I remember on, it was something to the effect a small addition sometimes is all you need. So there was a couple kitchen remodels that featured overhanging additions to solve setback problems. So that was pretty cool. Thanks for writing, Keith. You guys ready to take some questions? You have anything else to add, Matt?
Nah.
You sure?
Still don't do it.
What, the
Garrison
the
overhang.
overhang? Yeah.
Please don't.
I think it looks funny.
Yeah, that's my main gripe with
Yeah.
it, I think. Even if you could detail that right, I don't like the way it looks.
Yeah. It does make sense for cheap square footage, but
Yeah.
Now, even on the traditional houses that you see, that were
Like
done
an
that
you're
way,
talking like colonial.
the actual original houses, do you feel? Because, the thing is, we've talked about this before, a lot of the existing architectural details we use, especially in traditionally styled homes, are kind of, bastardized versions of something that actually had a purpose at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you get the proportions and detailing right, I think,
It still looks funny.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think of this. There's an old fort. I think it's in Fort Anne, New York. It's like an old log fort, and it actually may be a recreation of the thing, and it still looks stupid.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
I love it. I think it looks stupid too. Okay. Jeff Newman writes, "Greetings, FHB podcast people. I love the show and have just recently subscribed to the magazine. Thanks, Jeff. I'm currently remodeling a 1902 farmhouse and I'm wanting to raise the ground level up to the front door entrance. I don't want any steps involved with getting into the house. When my in-laws lived in this house, it was a chore to get them inside and outside with a wheelchair and walker. Since this home is going to be our forever home, we would like to make the entry as easy as possible. I know some of the wood framing would be below grade if I raise the grade. I plan on insulating this house from the outside, but I don't really like seeing the insulation 4 to 6 inches away from the foundation. So I thought of pouring a concrete foundation with a stem wall that would hide the bottom of the insulation. So I guess he would put a little foundation under this added insulation layer so it would look continuous. What would your detail for this wall assembly be so I could raise the elevation of the house to the floor height? Would my assembly work, or what would you suggest? In the drawing, I forgot to show the drainage at the base of the footing, but I plan to include that. Thank you." Boy, I'm gonna let one of you guys take this because this is a deep question.
Well, one, have you heard of ramps? I mean, that seems like the easy solution. But you could roll a wheelchair up it, no problem. You can walk on it easily.
That was my first response too, but maybe there's more that I'm not seeing here.
Well, he makes it pretty clear that he is sensitive about the aesthetic detailing. I mean, he doesn't even like the idea of having the exterior insulation on the walls overhang the foundation, so it looks like the foundation's too small. and that's where he's coming up with the stem wall, which seems to solve two problems. It gets the foundation higher up, which keeps the moisture, the groundwater away from his wood framing inside the house.
So you'd pour this little concrete layer that would then go to at least the point where the new grade would be established.
Yep.
And you think that would protect the wood framing behind it?
I mean, obviously, you got to think about how are you sealing that against the old foundation or the foam that he's putting behind it. You look at his drawing, and he's obviously done his homework. He's looking at all the details. You just have to make sure that you've got all of those waterproofing details.
Because it will rot your house.
Done thoroughly well. But I mean, think about it. This guy sent us a drawing, and it shows his existing masonry foundation, which has a solid sill beam sitting on top of it. And he's just talking about pouring an exterior concrete wall with foam insulation behind it up above the level of that beam to about the wall, where the bottom edge of the wall is on his house. And you figure you got a lot of examples of foundations where you have beams pocketed into the foundation that are below the level of the grade outside. As long as you get those waterproofing details between that new stem wall and the existing wall done really well, that seems like a reasonable thing. But my first inclination before I even got down to looking at his drawings and his explanation of what he would do is he's obviously got this old farmhouse and he's looking to have a traditional look to it. And my mind immediately turned to a typical bank barn, like old barns that were built into a hillside would have an earthen ramp, not just like you're talking about one of these wooden or metal ramps that people slap on the front of a house that looks like an afterthought. But if you built up with like a little stone retaining wall and even kept it away from the house and then just had a short little gangplank kind of porch deck connecting that earthen ramp, that could be a really nice detail that looks like it fits the era of the house.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to search for like pictures of what that looks like, the barns in the Catskills, that's like an almost universal detail there. And it looks really cool.
Yeah.
You changed your mind?
Well, no. I mean, I think it's not an uncommon detail when people want to have these sort of like grade level entrances that, you have a foundation, like the stem wall comes up and you have a ledge on it that the joists are in. And then, it basically that wall, the top of that is at the same level as the top of the joist, essentially.
Yep.
And that's not uncommon. And I think that's probably a good idea here if he really wants to raise the grade that bad.
But if he went with this earthen or modified ramp, built some sort of ramp that aesthetically matches the look of the house and wanted to keep the grade at the same level, I don't know if I would go through the trouble of pouring a concrete stem wall. I would go for more foam insulation. He's just got a thin little slab of foam behind that stem wall. I would go for a thicker layer of foam insulation and then just put stucco or cement board or some other other masonry looking material over that to get it out to close to the plane of the wall insulation, probably.
Yeah.
But as far back to the ramp idea is that one thing that a lot of people don't think about, it seems like in general in architecture, is incorporating the landscape to make it work with the design. People usually just sort of clear a lot and slap a house on it, and then all the exterior, the things that surround it are sort of an afterthought. But there was a house in Pauling, New York that I visited one time, designed by some architect, very modern house, and it was sort of tucked over a little hillside. And rather than making a walkway all the way down around this rocky hillside to the lower level of the house, they just made the main floor at the same height as this approach
and put a bridge.
Built this awesome bridge. And
I've always wanted a house with a bridge.
And it was such a beautiful, dramatic way to get into the house. So it's like I think people need to start thinking, just need to think outside the box a little bit and look at the...
He could do the same thing, right? He could raise the grade in front of the house and then have a bridge go from that to the house, and it would solve all these weird waterproofing problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good suggestion.
A lot less work, too.
Mm-hmm. A lot less money. Mm-hmm. I think this is going to be a very expensive project,
Yeah, yeah.
Good luck, man.
Yeah, amen. This question is something, we're doing something a little different today. This comes from our FHB Web Forum, which is new to the FHB website, right, Rob?
Well, so people may be familiar that we've had a forum associated with Fine Homebuilding since, I think, the beginning of our website back, I don't know, 15, 20 years
It's
ago.
at least that long.
And it was always called the Break Time Forum. And there have been different incarnations of it over the years, some more popular than others. And
Some not at all popular.
Yeah. And so we decided, or at least the company decided, that it made more sense, because it was on this old platform, to incorporate it into the website the same way Green Building Advisors Forum is, which is a very popular and successful place for people to share information. And so we brought it into the website. If you go to the top of any finehomebuilding.com webpage, you'll see forum in the little row of choices of places you can visit. And it's just a place where you can share ideas, share pictures of your work, ask questions, offer advice, and it's been pretty popular. We've noticed more and more people going to it since we've brought it into the website proper, and so we dug in there and found an interesting question.
Go ahead.
So this person, whose username is AJE Woodwork from Amherst, Massachusetts, says, I have a 12 by 24 room that sags in the middle by an inch. Not much if you live in an old house, but you know, if depending on the flooring you're looking for, an inch can be way too much. The previous owner had the support columns replaced, and my structural engineer said the sag is stable. I want to level the floor using sleepers. Any input, please? Now, if you go on that post, a couple of people asked some questions of him, and he hasn't gotten back in there yet to confirm, you know, what sort of floor system. I mean, obviously, you need a little bit more information, I think, to really truly answer this question, depending on what kind of flooring you're going to put on top of it. And so
I'd
guess,
like to know if, I'm assuming they're solid joists.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, again, we don't really know all that information. All we know is that it had columns underneath, which I'm guessing it's a framed floor system that has a basement below it.
And a center girder would be typical for a 24-foot span. So if the columns rotted at the bottom and settled, right, then the floor would come with.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So you figure depending on your goal and what you're putting on top of this, there's a handful of ways to do this. You can try to raise that framing back up to level it out, which can be tricky and risky.
And you have to do it often over a long period of time. It can take months or years to bring a floor back that much.
Yep. So basically you'd jack it up and slowly and eventually put some support or some sister joists or a new beam or posts underneath it. I ran into a similar problem with my daughter's bedroom, which I think sags about 5 inches from one side to the other. It sags so much that if you put a dresser against the wall that's 2 feet thick, you've got to put 1.5 inches shim underneath the front legs in order for it to be sitting level. So my idea was that it's got tongue and groove pine floor and no subfloor underneath that. That's the whole floor. And my idea was that I was going to tear up all of those boards and shim out, you know,
make
sleepers,
tapered sleepers
right over the old floor joists, and then put the flooring back down.
Except?
And that just seemed like a big mess. I
don't know how you'd resolve it at the door.
Well, the door was the high point.
That's luckily, yeah.
So I was just going to basically work from the door out with new sleepers. Obviously, that was because I had this beautiful tongue and groove pine flooring that I didn't want to lose by burying it. If you were putting new flooring over the top, I would say, if you have enough room, sleepers and then new plywood, basically a second subfloor over the top of it is a reasonable way overall, because this is a pretty big room. I mean, some people suggested using a self-leveling, you know, lightweight concrete.
I saw that in there.
And I'm thinking a 12 by 24 room full. I mean, it's not impossible. It's not a horrible idea.
It's going to be expensive.
Yeah, but that stuff is not cheap. So
and even if it is lightweight, that is just a ton of that stuff.
That's true.
To put on that floor system.
And it's not self-leveling either, I can tell you that. It's like the worst named product ever.
Mm-hmm.
You have to screed it level.
And if we think that the whole reason why this room sagged was because of weight in the first place, adding more weight to it might not be a good long-term solution.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious if the sag's in the middle and this is a big open space and there's no load-bearing walls on top, an inch isn't really that much to make up. Like, I've had to sort of like try to jack up floors from underneath. But the problem there was there were load-bearing walls on top,
Right.
and like that was difficult, and it did take months to raise that back up. And we did have one catastrophic stud failure in the process of that.
What happened?
Well, somebody got a little too overzealous in jacking, and you can hear things creak a little bit.
Yeah,
and
that's a good indication to stop.
yeah, and I stopped, and I was told that I was being a.
You were being too nervous.
I was
too
being
cautious.
too cautious.
Yeah.
I'm sure
And
that's
he
not
went-
the words he was using. But,
Yeah, and he went at it and like gave it like 2 more good goes, and you just heard this snap upstairs, and a bunch of people just were like, "Whoa!" And people were lucky they didn't get splinters in the face.
So what happened? The stud broke?
Oh yeah, it just like basically shattered.
Wow, that
Yeah.
takes a lot of force.
Yeah,
Wow, how
yeah.
exciting.
So go slow.
yeah,
But
yeah.
again, that though was a load-bearing wall over this
right.
beam.
And
in
it
the
had probably been
basement.
there for decades.
It was. I think the house was from the late 1700s, so
Yeah.
it was a timber frame. It had been there a long, long time.
People don't realize wood has this weird property where it can move quite a bit over long periods of time, but if you try and replicate that movement very quickly, it doesn't respond well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a viscoelastic quality.
Yeah.
but certainly,
To look up what that means sometime.
but certainly, jacking it up is certainly the cheapest solution. I mean, if
And
you,
I think the best.
Yeah,
I
if-
really, if you can fix it that way, that's the way to go.
and it really is amazing how much you can move an old house without doing any damage if you're careful and you do it slowly. I mean, I remember reading an article that Joe Stiebrick wrote about when he was doing a insulation retrofit on his house in Massachusetts, and the guys he worked with jacked up the house in order to put like ice and water type butyl membrane as a capillary break between his stone foundation and his solid wood sill beams, because when you tighten up a house, you have more potential, less drying potential. So he was worried about the capillary action coming up and potentially damaging those beams over time. And so they literally bolted brackets to both inside and outside of these beams and used little bottle jacks and did a section at a time and worked their way around his entire house and jacked it up at maybe a 1/4 inch or more in order to slip that butyl membrane underneath there. So if you're careful and you're paying attention to what you're doing and pay close attention to what is load bearing and where your lifting points are, you can move just about anything.
Railroad jacks are your friend. So it is like a trumpet-shaped jack with a screw head, and the trumpet is upside down, so the base is wider, and you screw it in or out with a piece of pipe, and you can move tons of stuff with that.
Yeah, the nice thing about those two is that people try to use car bottle jacks, and people can underestimate how heavy a house is.
And hydraulics can fail, right?
That's what I'm getting
a
at.
screw doesn't fail.
A giant cast iron screw, it may be hard to turn that thing, but it's much less likely to just pop on you like a bottle jack would.
Yeah, a bottle jack is not for lifting houses. Somebody put in there like building up layers of subfloor, like in the low spots and incrementally going up. I've never tried that. That seems like a reasonably good idea. You're adding a lot of dead load to that's already sunken part of the floor, so I don't know if that's good or bad, but
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to fill in that space. I mean, the key is that depending on it really depends on what sort of flooring you're planning on putting on top. I mean,
how much out of level it'll tolerate.
Yeah, because I remember I jacked up my kitchen and put an extra beam underneath it years ago because all I was putting down was some click-together cork engineered flooring, and they claimed that they didn't want it to be more than like, I don't know, an 1/8 or a 1/4 of an inch and 10 feet out, and that seems like a pretty tight tolerance. And in my old house, that's
not going
to happen. So I did the
put it
best
down
I
anyway?
could, and it worked out okay.
I would have thought that would be more tolerant of out-of-level conditions than many flooring types. That's kind of surprising to me.
Well, I guess because the joints fit so tight, and you're putting downward pressure on a joint that's meant to lay flat.
Mm-hmm.
So
Next question comes from Bob from Annapolis, Maryland. Hi, guys. I'm a relatively new listener. Enjoy catching up on the shows. I've always said the best practice for finishing basements is to leave them unfinished. Well, now I have a prospective client that has what seems to me a reasonable case for finishing the basement in their 1952 Cape in Annapolis. The house is up on a hill with good drainage, and they need additional living space. The question is about the walls. What's the right detail for finishing the CMU block walls? Dry lock, furring strips, or studs? Closed cell, green board? So, he says, by the way, insulation subs here do a lot of open cell in Maryland. I'm originally from Massachusetts, where closed cell is safe to assume when you request spray foam. I assume the difference is because of the difference in climate. So that's an important distinction. So spray foaming these concrete block walls is a really good way to stop the energy penalty and moisture movement through concrete block, which is notoriously vapor open and moisture open. So what do you guys think?
I mean, we keep turning back to that dry basement article that Andy Engel did. What's the title of that article? But it was where you do... you're basically building a foam box inside a basement and then covering it with
drywall,
drywall and 2 layers of subfloor as sort of a floating subfloor. It just seems like that's an easy way to do it, where you're getting things nice and flat and attaching things in a pretty simple way. Spray foam seems like a reasonable thing too, but it just seems like it's a lot more work for something that's already flat,
and it's expensive. Comparatively.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would tend to do spray foam if you have a more awkward situation where you're trying to work against uneven surfaces or inside cavities.
Or mechanicals are in the way.
Yeah, but flat, smooth, open CMU walls seems like rigid foam is the way to go. You pin it to the sill at the top, and you can. I mean, a lot of times you can get away with literally just pinning it at the top and taping the seams. I mean, it's not like it's not like it has to be secure in the middle of the field.
And then you put studs in front.
Yeah, build a stud wall in front, or if you're
I like metal
limited
studs for
space,
this.
If you have limited space, you can do furring strips.
And steel is better than wood because it doesn't mold and rot.
Sure.
What do you say about this whole thing? You have a block foundation?
Yeah, and where I have rigid foam insulation, it's pretty much just pressure fit in there. I mean, I can take it out if I wanted to in most places.
And it works good?
It's fine, yeah. It sits flat on its own with no attachment, and I can take it out if I want to.
But now he's talking about finishing this basement, so I assume he's going to want to have some sort of furring strips or studs because he's going to have to drywall.
Yeah, he's going to have drywall fire barrier.
Because he asked about green board too. I mean, I'm assuming he means the
green drywall.
The green drywall, from everything I've heard, is kind of like not really doing anything for you. I mean, you basically don't want drywall in a wet location. So
the fiberglass face drywall instead of paper face would be the way to go.
Yeah, if you are concerned at all about moisture, especially coming from behind, that's a great suggestion. Fiberglass faced. Now, have you guys seen that available in your local building supplier? Is it custom order?
I had to order it.
Yeah.
Dense glass silver, I think it was called, is the residential. Maybe it's Dense Shield, I forget. But it's a Georgia Pacific product, and it's made for residential applications. It's very much like the yellow stuff you see on commercial buildings, but it's 1/2 inch thick and less expensive.
Yeah, it's another example of a product that's been used in the commercial and industrial world for a long time that is slowly trickling into the residential world. There's so many materials like that are possibly better than or work for difficult situations. I mean, I think they actually use the dense glass gold as exterior sheathing on houses because it's tough stuff.
And cheaper than many things, and that matters in a commercial building for sure.
And I think there's one other option here. I can't remember the name of this, but I'm sure I've seen it, and I may be misremembering, but I think there's like a foam product that has sort of like a furring channel in it that you can attach stuff to. So
it's called Dow Wallmate.
Yeah, and I think there's other ones out there too, but you basically just glue these panels to the wall, and then you can attach your drywall right to that.
And there's each edge, 8-foot edge, has a rabbet that's sized 3/4 of an inch deep. So when you put the two panels together, the space is wide enough that it takes a single furring strip.
Does it have embedded screw strips in the field on that material?
No,
or
you fasten your wallboard then to the furring strips.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the one I'm talking about actually has an integral with it. So you just stick it up.
Kind of like the way ICFs work, where they have a plastic embedded layer that's basically meant as a screw support.
Yep.
Do you know the name of that product?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
We'll look up that. Get that on the website.
I know it's on this website somewhere. I just can't remember where.
Our next question comes from Hunter in Southern California. Hello, gentlemen. I come from a construction family. Dad is a general contractor. Mother, stepmother, and brother are all licensed tile setters. Uncle is a roofer. Grandpa is an OBGYN. Go figure. I've worked as a carpenter builder in some capacity my entire life, currently working in the film industry as a union prop maker and project manager. I'm an avid listener of your podcast, read your magazine, as well as JLC and Fine Woodworking. I'm a huge fan of Mike Gurton and Christine Williamson, a lover of all nerdy building topics and practices. Well, welcome to the club, Hunter. I'm currently preparing to transition into running my own construction company. I'm ready to obtain my license. I've been speaking to numerous contacts regarding business and accounting in order to streamline the process of starting my own business and ensure I get what I want out of it. Throughout all this, I've been thinking a lot about others who are in the same boat, others who may not have all the resources, connections, or prior knowledge. Sure, you need the experience, but who is to say that the person you gained said experience from was setting a good example and using the best practices both in building and in business? Even studying for my exam has been a frustrating process. So many companies offer subpar study materials with blatant errors, including typos, etc., all of which can be discouraging, especially to someone who doesn't know that when they say screening, they mean screeding. The audio CDs are even worse, dreary and slow, not spoken with any sort of cadence at all. He's making me a little self-conscious about how I'm reading this. Resources for business seem even farther and few between. Knowing the ins and outs of these decisions is so important to protecting yourself and being successful, and I would add doing a good job for your clients, right? Now, maybe I missed it, and maybe this is out there in the lost of the abyss of the internet. However, it seems to me that if we want to keep craft alive, it would be a great benefit to have resources to help ease navigation of what is a difficult and potentially discouraging start for some. Study material that is clear, correct, and not difficult to acquire. Information on business that is related to construction and understandable to someone who doesn't speak the language. Even opportunities to have a consultation with somebody who's willing to take 15 minutes to quickly and clearly help one understand why an S-Corp isn't or isn't right for you. All I know is that for me, the process has been like trying to find an episode of FHB podcast that doesn't include the phrase air sealing. Well, we were doing fine until he wrote this letter.
Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted. I honestly hope that this is a pointlessly written email and that the resources exist. However, if they don't, I know myself and hopefully others will be willing to contribute to the Fine Homebuilding educational series, What the Hell Am I Doing and Is It Right? Constructing a Business in Construction.
Can we steal that?
It's pretty good, right? Thank you for your time, and as always, keep craft alive. Well, that is a really good question. So I don't know how to exactly answer this, except I compiled my list of, I think, are good materials, but maybe you guys have other things that you would tell him besides research books.
Well, before you get into some answers to the question, I have to say, I mean, that it's exciting to see someone that's putting this much thought and effort and care into these questions. I mean, this is what we're here for, and sometimes we get lost in like the same loop of talking about the same topics over and over again, and really it's hearing from our readers and listeners that is the way for us to grow and to start trying to focus on the problems that they're really having today. So we're gonna certainly
What's he saying?
Well, I'm just saying we're certainly gonna look hard at this and try to share more of this types of information in the future.
So what do you got?
I got nothing. I didn't see this question
until you went to school.
Yeah.
For construction management.
For residential construction.
So tell me, like, what do you learn in construction school?
You learn how to build sort of to code. You know, we were learning sort of I wouldn't say just the basics. I mean, you start out with framing, you move on to finish, advanced framing. Trying to basically right-sizing your headers, right-sizing, all of your floor framing, how to read all of the various tables for all the different things, how to read the code book, and, all kinds of that stuff, but also how to build stairs, millwork.
So more than nuts and bolts of residential construction, not running a construction business.
Not really. I mean, we spent, I think, about half a semester talking about, the various types of businesses that you can set up and stuff like that. But it's really specific, I think, to the state that you're in, maybe even the municipality, like what kind of licensing you need and stuff like that. Parts of New York State, for example, don't require any kind of licensing for various kinds of contractors.
I think a lot of the country that's the case.
Yeah. So when I hear people say oh, I got to take this test, I'm like, for what? Because that's outside of the experience that I've had so far. But
Well, the thing is, we have so many more resources available to us right now than we did a generation ago, as far as trying to find the answers.
Even
to
20 years
like
ago.
This. Well, even just a handful of years ago. Every year, it just seems like we have more. But that also means that there's more to sift through to try to find what the really good information is.
For every piece of good information, there's dozens of dubious information.
Yeah. I mean, we've had a building business blog on our website for years now, and different people have contributed to it over the years. I would say that Sean Van Dyke's articles on that blog are on par with what he's talking about trying to figure out the best ways to build your business practices to be successful in business and what important things are to focus on. So I'll certainly put some links to some of those blog posts in here.
I had this was a very personal question for me. When I got out of college, the first thing I did was start a home improvement business, right? I got Magneto signs made for my truck. I bought a crossover toolbox and some tools, and I was a carpenter. And I didn't know anything,
Yeah.
And I think that's the very common experience, right? So I think back to what helped me the most, and it's not a plug. Fine Homebuilding was the resource when I was that age. Like, there wasn't much else to look at. And later I discovered JLC, which is another good magazine related to the craft of building houses. And those were extremely helpful. And then in the subsequent years, there have been other materials that have helped me a lot. And one that I really like, and I'm not a contractor anymore, but The Elements of Building by Mark Curson, who is a contractor. And the great thing about Mark's book is that they're like little lessons, and you can be sitting in the truck waiting for an inspector or a subcontractor that you're meeting with, and you can read these things that are usually a few sentences to a few pages long, and boy, they really hit on all cylinders with this guy describes his own experience and what has made him a better contractor, both in terms of being a better business person and doing a better job for your clients, because I think those things go hand in hand to have a successful construction company, because if you have a good business but you're doing crappy work, no one's going to hire you. If you're doing good work but can't run a business, you're going to be out of business. It seems like you have to learn both of those things at the same time. And it's evolutionary. You're not going to just know everything one day. And you don't know like all you need to know 20 years later, because you get new products and, the kind of people that we work with are building custom homes. Everyone is a prototype. There's no lessons to take oftentimes to the next project.
Yeah. And Hunter makes a good point. It's like, how do you know what is the right information, or who are the good mentors? Nowadays you can go onto Instagram or wherever and find examples of people doing the work that is similar to what you're...
And it might even look great.
Yeah.
Right. That's the thing. Like, how do you judge whether... just because it looks good doesn't mean it is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I'd say you just got to use whatever means are comfortable to you to try to find those good mentors, to try to see what people are doing in your area, and maybe even find some local organizations, whether it's a business networking group or local NHB chapter or something like that, where you can actually start to get to know some of the people that are doing the kind of work that you appreciate. But it takes experience. It takes time. People can give you information when you're 19 years old that you're just not going to be ready to absorb into your experience. So some of this just takes time and paying attention and just really keeping your eye out and searching for who's doing that good work and sharing that good information. And you got to use your best judgment to see what information is actually valuable to your own situation.
I got some other textbooks.
Okay.
So Running a Successful Construction Company is one title, and Nail Your Numbers is another. Those are both by David Gerstel. One is published by Taunton, which is Running a Successful Construction Company, and Nail Your Numbers is not published by Taunton. I don't know who the publisher is of that. But those have both been cited by many folks as being very helpful to their businesses. One book I just got that is so fantastic. It is called Water and Buildings, An Architect's Guide to Moisture and Mold by William Rose. So I've put off buying this book because it's $100 for, I think, more than 10 years, right?
Yeah.
I think it came out in 2006.
Yeah.
I was always scared off by the $100 price tag, but recently I bought it on Amazon for $60, and I don't know if...
Oh, lucky.
I don't know if that's still the case, but not only is this book a wealth of information on building science, but it is very entertaining to read. It is not dry. It's running water and buildings. And it's just fun. So what I learned about this, I look like I read a lot of nonfiction, is I read things that catch my attention. I'm not one to read that kind of book cover to cover. I just don't have it in me. But I learned that French drains, do you know where the origin of that? So the first treatise on drainage for construction was called, I think it was called Farm Drainage, and it was written by this guy French in 1865. And so that's the origin of a French drain. It's not because it comes from France. It's this guy's name. So
Right.
I learned that. I never knew that origin of that. And this book is full of like fascinating tidbits like that. The other one's great if you're actually doing jobs. Once you get to that point, is the Code Check series, and that's by Taunton too. We've talked about those on the show before. Extremely valuable to know what you're doing is going to be allowed by the inspector. It's super easy to reference. Like, it's organized by the various sub trades in the residential process, and you can look up things from like how many circuits do you need in the kitchen, like what ampicity they need to be, all this stuff, and it's really easy to look up and get information quickly.
Yeah, it's like it condenses important parts of the code and explains it in much simpler language.
And it's visual.
Yeah.
And I put on here, and you called me on this, Matt, before we started recording. I put on here the IRC. And it's not because I'm a huge fan. It's just because I think you need to look up stuff all the time.
Yeah, and you can get it online.
Free. All of it.
Yeah, like if you just search around, you may not be able to go to the IRC website and just click on it and it pops up for free, the latest version or whatever. But if you search around enough, you'll find a link.
Yeah, there are some portals that basically break it down into all of its tiny little parts, and so you can't just sit there and read a chapter, but you can go bit by bit or look up very specific questions.
And you can go on the IRC and actually read it chapter by chapter if you want. You just have to find
you want
the link.
to. It's going to be very scintillating.
Yeah, and actually they just changed their interface within the last few weeks, I think, because I'm on that website all the time looking up various things. And it's different navigation now, but it's kind of easier navigation. So I would say definitely.
I would say
check
a
out that
hint for
website.
using the free versions, and there are many incarnations out there on the web, is to, when you do a Google search or a web search, do IRC and then the subject you want to look for. And invariably, somewhere it's going to pop up the exact section that you can either look in your own book or then go to the ICC website to look up the actual document.
Yeah.
What do you think? So it's an investment, right? So you can get the current copy of the 2018 IRC for $144. There's also the version with the commentary, and that's the one I prefer. It costs more, $266, so it's another $122 over the normal version, but it often describes the why behind the code sections. So
that's like getting like the director's cut version of a movie.
it is. And sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not, but it's worth it gives you a little more insight into the why.
Yeah, mostly for the changes. I don't know if it really talks about the whys for stuff that's been in the code forever, but
sometimes.
Sometimes. But every time there's a change, like it kind of explains it, and that's
oftentimes the wording, the verbiage is easier to understand in the commentary than it is in the actual code section. It's
right.
Like you can use this to understand what they're really trying to say.
Yeah.
Because it's written in plain language instead of some carefully crafted language that can't be misinterpreted, basically.
Yeah, the rest of it seems like it was written by a bot. That's the only part that seems like it was written by a person.
I don't know why it's so unintelligible, but it's got to be very difficult writing, a reference book with hundreds of people in on the process. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, if you, not that anybody wants to do this, but if you look at like the comments that people submit for like changes to the code at any point in time, if you've got really nothing else to do and you're thinking about maybe, I don't know, hurting yourself, then consider doing
It's an option.
this. It's an option.
I also said Green Building Advisor because, like, the wealth of knowledge on that site, and you have assembly details to help you do a good job with even weird building scenarios. Like, what is that, $100 a month, Rob?
$100
a year.
A year gets you all of the access to the drawing library that they have there, which has lots of great building science
Details.
details, and a deeper encyclopedia of basic green building and building science concepts, plus access to some of the richer articles. And of course, turn to the Q&A forum there, just like ours. The one thing about we're going to hopefully get more of our staff or contributors into our forum soon to give some helpful insight into some of the questions that people have in there. But on Green Building Advisor, I've never experienced a forum that is as rich and useful as that group of people. If you have a question,
and so responsive.
Within it, every question
hours.
I've ever asked has been answered by multiple people. If
knowledgeable people.
Very knowledgeable people who are very generous with their time and information and experience.
Very true.
And very many different fields related to construction, from architects to engineers to builders.
And I think it's that wealth of experience that really adds to those discussions on that site, because oftentimes there's someone who raises a point that nobody else had thought of, right? Because they just have a different experience or a different, part of the residential building process.
Sure, and depending on the region and the people's building philosophies and reasons for doing some of the things they are doing, there can be some arguments on there, but they're very objective, constructive, valuable bits of information.
The site is well moderated, so you don't have trolling and silliness that you get so many places.
Yeah, it's not like hanging out on Facebook.
Yeah.
But so just like many people feel that they come to us just for insulation, air sealing, and old house problem questions, we can do a lot more than that. Same thing with those forums is that any type of building related question, whether it's business related or family dispute related.
We need more of those. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Don't hesitate to ask those sorts of questions.
Do you have any favorite books that you think help someone be a better builder?
I don't know. You can get Audell's.
Do they still print those?
I don't know if they still print them, but I found a copy, or like the full 4-book set at a book sale somewhere.
It can't be current though, Matt.
No, it's not.
I mean, you have to be worried about that kind of stuff because it just was written in a different...
it's not going to get you to code, but I mean, it's going to show you how old people used to build houses in the old days.
What was that book that I found you at the thrift store, Patrick?
It was just a construction textbook, I think, right?
Yeah,
and it comes from the 50s?
Not sure if it was quite that old. I think it was like
maybe 60s or 70s.
Oh.
The thing that I observed was that like the interior finishes that they kept showing were so impossibly hideous, so ugly, as an ugly period of time.
Oh, A Roof Cutter's Secrets. That's a good one.
That's a good one. If you're going to do your own framing, that's indispensable.
Yeah.
What is there been any text that...
I've been so immersed in the website that I don't find as much time to read books as I would like to.
Well, there must have been something that you've consulted in your many years in this wacky business.
Many years. I mean, we've talked about this before, I think, but a pattern language. It sometimes reads
for design.
It reads a little bit like the code book, but a little bit more artfully written. But it's
if the code was on acid, that's what it sounds like.
But yeah, it's a group of people that basically did a thorough research of building throughout time around the globe and tried to identify patterns that make buildings work for people, that make them comfortable and practical to live in.
It's a great book, no doubt. Charlie Wing, I think it's called Illustrated Guide to Building. It was originally a Taunton book, but I don't think Taunton's produced it for a long time. But I think it's still in print and by the different publisher. But I found that one very helpful when I was a construction supervisor at Habitat for Humanity, because it had like really practical things like how to wire a 3- and 4-way switch, span tables, like how to book your shingles so you have the maximum coverage with the fewest aligned seams, just really super good practical information. And it had a good index, which is like something that's very useful when you have a reference book, I would say.
Sure.
Got to have a good index.
Yeah.
You're looking for other stuff?
Yeah, there's another book, and I know this sounds cheesy as heck, but we actually used this some in school. It was like the Black & Decker, I think it's called the Book of Home Improvement or something like that. And it does have like some, it's all like code, approved stuff. But yeah, we used it a lot for electrical stuff because it shows you how to wire all kinds of circuits, and that part of it at least was helpful. And I haven't been through the rest of the book to know if it was worth it, but I think I paid like $1.81 for it on Amazon. So
what's not to like?
What's not to like? Exactly.
That's cool. Well, that was a great question. I expect we'll put all these books up on the podcast page.
Definitely, and we'll kind of dig into his, because this is a nice, long, well-written letter that he sent to us, and I'm going to seriously look at that to, for inspiration for stuff for us to cover in the future.
Cool. I just want to talk about one thing I forgot to mention in our reader project. So I had a photo shoot on Tuesday. I drove to Western Pennsylvania to photograph a gentleman who was showing me how to repair hardwood floors, and for those of you who don't know, I imagine it's most of you, so the Fine Homebuilding editors are also the photographers oftentimes on the magazines, and we have these light kits that I don't know that they date to the Reagan administration, but certainly the first George W. Bush administration. And this stuff is ugly, but it's absolutely reliable, which is why we use it, except when it's not reliable. And this is the power pack. This is a 1,000-watt power pack. And what it does is it sends the electrical blast of electricity that triggers our strobe lights. And so on Tuesday morning, I set all my lights up, and I'm ready to get this guy going, and I have him stand in so I can compose the shot. I take a couple practice photos to see if the exposure's right and it's in focus and stuff. It's all working great. So he's like, I think we're ready. I'm like, I'm ready. So he's like, I'm going to go out to my truck and get one more thing, and then we'll get started. So I said, okay, I'm going to go get my water bottle out of my car and come back in. And so I come back in, and this gray box, which is got a big capacitor in it and some switches on it and stuff, is making this very distinctive sound of frying electronics. That kind of like... And I look at the carpenter and I say, well, that doesn't sound good. And he's like, no, it doesn't. He's like, I think it was your box over there. And I said, I think so too. So I go over, and on the back of it, there's a little circuit breaker, and you can tell it had been tripped. And so I said, well, that's odd. So I push it back in, and it starts making that noise again. So like any tradesperson would, I smacked the side of it a couple times. I'm like, I'll fix that. Well, it blew up. And it was very exciting, and I really didn't know what happened. And Rob, the guy who was going to fix the floor, he's like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I think so. And he's like, can you hear? I was like,
what?
Yeah, I think so.
So now when you say it blew up, I mean, there wasn't like a ball of flame coming out of it, was there?
It was an explosion, and there was no flame, there was no smoke, but it was a bomb. And it sounded like not an M80, but like a normal firecracker, like a thunder bomb, right?
If you look at this thing, it's what it sort of looks like a square lunchbox, and
It looks like something that came from the Eisenhower administration to like detect radiation, right? It's a very old school looking thing.
Geiger counter.
But
It
you know,
does.
but
It
you know
looks
when
like
you
a
see
Geiger
in movies when they're like a bunch of thieves blowing up a bank safe or like a hatch on some submarine, and you see that big dent in the door from them blowing up a bomb on the other side. That's kind of what the top of this thing looks like, right?
So the
now.
top was flat, but now it's all arched up, and the sides like distended. And I gotta say, the thing did exactly what it was supposed to. It like contained the explosion, but let the gases out, so like it didn't hurt me with shrapnel, right? And the best part, my favorite part, is like one of the rocker switches that is on top of this thing that controls like how much power or if it's on or off or whatever, like blew out of the case. And probably let out some of the pressure too, but that was exciting.
Yeah.
I've had every problem on a photo shoot, but not this one. This was a first.
Oh my gosh.
Fun.
Those guys could not stop talking about that the whole time.
Oh, I believe
it was like it was the highlight of their day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Time Patrick almost killed us.
Like I've said this before, if we didn't have these little catastrophes now and then, we wouldn't really have that many interesting stories to tell, right?
This is a first. I wouldn't have wanted to miss it. I got to say, I'm glad it was me and not one of you guys that was, I got to experience the fun of the exploding power
I'm
pack.
jealous.
Yeah. So I had to go to the hardware store and buy a couple LED work lights to stand in for my strobes. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, the project itself in like physical space is small, right? You're talking about a board in front of a guy. Like these strobe lights put off a ton of illumination for a split second, right?
Yeah.
It's like a lightning strike.
Mm-hmm. You almost can't imagine. It's like, because mine didn't blow up, but I had a light kit fail on me once, and I went out and bought some LED lights similar to what you got, and it just
so
was
weak.
not enough. Not nearly enough.
It is not enough horsepower.
Yeah.
I emailed the company this morning that makes this. They've been making them in New Jersey for decades, so I can't wait to see what they say. I'm going to get out of here go check my email, because I asked them if this is a common thing. I want to know what they're going to say.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it happens all the time. Or like, oh, no, this is the first one.
Yeah, the company's going to be like, we went out of business in 1989.
Have you seen this, Jeff?
I've never seen not like that. No.
It was cool.
I did find that insulation. I was doing some.
Oh, you
searching.
did?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's called InsoFast, and it has sort of.
And this is the stuff for the basement walls.
Yeah, that you glue on, and it has built-in polypropylene studs, 16 inches on center, and you can, so they don't mold. You can just screw right into them.
Cool.
Yep.
That seems like a great product.
Mm-hmm.
They'll probably send you a pallet now.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Thanks to Matt and Rob for joining me, and Jeff. And thanks to all of you for listening. Remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Happy building. Keep craft alive. Thanks again for listening.